Hello, it's Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here today with my week of reading wrap-up. This is where I talk about the books that I read last week, what I'm currently reading, and what I could read next week, depending on my mood. So I had a fantastic, phenomenal, for the record books kind of week of reading, and I think it's all due to the fact that I'm reading both novellas and nonfiction, both of which I'm really, really invested and interested in. And I'm reading most of the work that I already own. So I'm already biased toward liking it. But I was able to just knock them out. So let's get to it, and I'll take you through what I was able to read. The first thing that I completed was Insurgent Muse, Life and Art at the Women's Building by Terry Wolverton. This book was one of my Bert's List recommended reads. I'll put a link to the video below where I talk about how that came into being and what the books on that list were, because every single one of those recommendations has been outstanding and has hit it out of the park, this being no exception. I'm incredibly interested in feminism. I'm interested in the history of feminism. I'm interested in stories of how women get pulled into working with other women and hear the feminist call, so to speak, how that works, how we build and grow together. This was right in my wheelhouse. So this is the story of Terry Wolverton. She was a key figure in the maybe second wave of the Women's Building, but she talks in the first half about how the Women's Building in Los Angeles came into being, what the goal was, why they were there. And it also talks about her moving from Detroit and her being a young lesbian in Detroit and just feeling just out of place, feeling uninspired, unable to kind of find a direction. Suicide attempts, unfulfilling romantic relationships, all of these things led her to move to Los Angeles and show up for the Women's Building and take classes there and study. And she eventually really taps into something in herself as a leader and finds ways that through working in this community and through the challenges and all of the ways that they've had to struggle both to get funding and the interpersonal struggles of working in a community in a collaborative way, personal hierarchies, all of those things, she was able to find nascent skills that she didn't know she had and was able to transform them for the betterment of the community. I love stuff like that. And for me, it was also personally revelatory. There were so many things. What's interesting is no flags in the beginning of the book, but then all of a sudden near the end, kind of maybe the second half, all of a sudden, all of these things start to come together for her. I also my background is in DIY scenes and local Bay Area music scenes, and I grew up in a very similar way. I grew up meaning came into my own and figured out who I was and what I could offer the world through community and through maybe fringe community type of environments. So this really spoke to me in really deep ways. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I learned a lot about some of the feminist artists of the 70s and 80s that I had heard of, but maybe I got more depth and more insight. So this was wonderful. Excellent job, Bert. Then after that, I read To Throw Away Unopened by Viv Albertine. Viv Albertine, as I've mentioned before, was the guitarist for a punk band from the late 70s called The Slits. And she also, very similar to myself and to this book, kind of had found her way and through just experiential living and trying things. This is her second memoir. In this book, she talks a lot about her mother and how she was raised by her mother, her absentee father, and her relationship with her mother as well as with her daughter, and how she's thinking about this as her mother is nearing the end of her life and as her mother passes. her relationship with her sister, her relationship with her community, how she thinks about herself in the world, and just the strong, beautiful relationship she had with her mother. There's such interesting twists that happen in this book that I don't want to say anymore. Just suffice it to say, I find her voice remarkable. It's fresh, it's very raw and authentic, and you really get a sense that she's talking to you. There's not an air. She's definitely opening up a lot of truths and a lot of self-discovery in here. You go on a journey with Viv as you read this book, and I was delighted with it. Thought it was fantastic. Then I read a book that I have been personally recommended by my friend Lydia, who's in my real life book club, and that is The Passion by Jeanette Winterson. This is a book, number one, the cover is just magnificent. This is set in Napoleonic times, and we follow two different stories. So there's a woman from Venice, and there is a man who is apprenticed, a young man who's apprenticed up through the ranks of cook, and becomes very close with Napoleon and serves Napoleon. And it is their journeys, and there's interconnected stories. Her writing is really evocative and lush, almost experimental. It's not always linear. It's there's some magicalness, not magic, but an artistic lens through which she even approaches the material. Beautiful. It's slightly abstracted, but still very full of heart. This was a lovely, lovely book. I gave it 4 stars. I also had a chance to jump into, which I'd been wanting to reread. This is What We See When We Read by Peter Mendelsund. And I had said in my last, this is one of those things where you remember a book differently than it is. I said this was what happens to your brain when you read. In my week of reading wrap-up last week, when I said I was probably going to jump into this. And it's so much more. It's also about the way reading impacts us. And so there is such a lot here. I reduced it too far. Next up this is a book that I bought in Paris when I was last from the Shakespeare Company in Paris. And this is Sophie Divry's The Library of Unrequited Love. So this is told as a soliloquy. It's a woman who works, she's a librarian, and she finds someone has fallen asleep when she comes in to open the library, and she wakes him up, and she can't let him leave yet. She ends up just kind of talking to him in this one-way conversation. It's full of interesting things. She's very sharp. It's got a sharp edge to it. It's a very, very quick 80 to 90 pages. She talks about the Dewey Decimal System and interesting things about libraries. This was fun. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. And, for 80, 90 pages, easy, you can knock it out quickly. And then that led into a companion book that I wanted to read, Ex-Libris by Fadiman. This is Confessions of a Common Reader. And this is something that is heralded around. So many people love this, and it's very easy to see why. Her writing is crisp. It's clear, but it's really packed, very precise, beautiful, beautiful sentence structures. She's talking about something that she deeply loves. There's humor, there's lightness here, there's interest, there's depth. You learn something. There are a series of essays about readers and about what it is to be a reader. The first one might be my favorite, and it is the story of how she and her husband, after being married for a number of years and living together for a number of years, finally decide that they're going to commingle their libraries and what that ends up happening for them as a married couple, which I thought was delightful and charming. I will say not all of the essays worked for me. I found myself skimming through some of them, but on the whole, most of them worked. I enjoyed it tremendously and gave it a 4-star. And then the last was the weirdest, so strange. Muriel Sparks, The Driver's Seat. So I have read, I love these editions from New Direction, paperback. I have read, this will be my 3rd Muriel Sparks. And each time you come up with something different. So I read The Prom of Miss Jane Brodie, which is really a subversive look at this woman who's a teacher at this all-women's school, all-girls school, and all the ways that she's trying to push fascism, and she's molding these children and their adoration for her and how she manipulates them. Really, really interesting, but told in kind of a straightforward narrative, as you would expect a story about a teacher and the students in a boarding school. The second book I read was Memento Mori, which was phenomenal. Really kind of dark, funny, about a collection of older people in that are all connected to each other. They all know each other in this community. And they keep getting these prank phone calls, and the person says, "Don't forget you have to die," or something along those effects. Don't forget to die, and they don't know what it means, and it creates this havoc. And so it's this darkly, darkly funny book. This is something completely different. This is a story of a woman who is apparent from the very beginning. She is unhinged. She's tightly wound. She is having maybe in the throes of a nervous breakdown, or she is just psychotic. And we follow her as she leaves her work and is on the way to a vacation in an unknown place, and she's going to be meeting up with someone. And I don't want to say too much about this, except that she is hell-bent on something, and the pace of this is very, very, very interesting. And you also learn in the second chapter, very early on, that something bad happens to her. And so you have this preview, and then you watch her, and it's a very subversive way of and a subversive take on the typical story of victimhood and control and sanity, all of that. Dark, very interesting. This one I like more after I've been thinking about it a little bit. And there's a film that Elizabeth Taylor did. I've seen a couple little snippets of it. I'm going to watch all of it because I think it looked fantastic, and it looked right, like a really traditional interpretation of this. Very interesting. I also completed Sontag, Her Life and Work, and this was done by Benjamin Moser. He did the biography. It is not without controversy. There is a sense that maybe he doesn't really like her very much in the book as you read it, or at least that's been a lot of the criticism. I found the book to be tremendously interesting. The pace, the how he talked about her life and led you on the journey as to who she is, why she did some of the things that she did. I think he absolutely has a respect for her, but at the same time can see her flaws. I have not read any of Susan Sontag's work in it, but it's been something I've been very interested in. What I find most interesting is that there are connections with something else that I want to read, which I'll talk about a little later, and something I'm making my way through, which is the Audrey and Rich collection of essays. So it's very much a time and place of feminist works from the Insurgent Muse and this. You could see a theme kind of appearing. So finished that, really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And that's everything that I finished. Yeah, it's going to be a while before I have another reading week as remarkable as that. But let me tell you what I am reading. So I mentioned this is the Essential Essays, Culture, Politics, and the Art of Poetry by Adrienne Rich. So the controversy between Adrienne Rich and Susan Sontag was twofold. First, Susan Sontag was in the closet. She was not acknowledging her lesbian relationships, but at the same time talking about a lot of things where it would have been relevant. And so a lot of people found it problematic that she was staying in the closet, including Adrienne Rich. And then also when Susan talks a lot about the body in a lot of her works, and she kept talking about the body as this abstraction. And what's interesting is that she railed a lot against abstraction in writing and illness as metaphor, regarding the pain of others. So she has these books about suffering, about the body. She famously survived cancer, and one of the cancer treatments caused her hair to go gray, and hence the famous lock of gray white hair that she had. Adrienne Rich felt that it was very important to place yourself in your body, and that was a political conversation. That was a political act to kind of reclaim and talk about the body as a woman. And so there's this very interesting little sections about some of their back and forth and the differences in how they approached the similar material at the same time, which I found very interesting, and it's going to give me a little bit more context as I start reading this. So wonderful. This is The Mitfords Letters Between Six Sisters, edited by Charlotte Mosley. This is such a great, fun book. There's what she's done is she's broken out the letters into years, and she's provided at the beginning, she's provided the context for what's happened during that era that she's talking about. And then you dive straight into the letters. And this family was so interesting because they had their own language, they had nicknames, they had ways of speaking that are foreign to other people. So there's even a guide as to who people are, what they're talking about. And they have so many nicknames for the same people that sometimes it's you very easily lose track. But they know exactly what they were talking about. And so having that code to decipher it is fantastic. I'm enjoying it so much, but needing to read a little at a time as I move through. I'm also listening to an audiobook. I think I'm going to do a video about this before the end of Nonfiction November. I actually do read a lot of business books and leadership books and design thinking books, approaches, kind of business philosophy type books. So the one that I'm reading right now is called The Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And this is really for managers and leaders about how do you get the best out of people by being expansive as opposed to restrictive. And so it takes some use cases of fairly famous leaders and shows how they hire the right people, set a framework, challenged them, but allowed the teams to work on their own and be independent as they solve the problems, and where the role of the manager is, where the role of the leader is, and where the role of the leader is not. And it's very inspiring. I was recently promoted and am building out a department, so it's been really a lot of great lessons for me as I'm listening to it. So I'm enjoying it very much. I'm also reading Against Memoir by Michelle T. So enjoying that. Michelle T. spent a lot of her time in San Francisco around the same years that I was here, and so there's an interesting cross pollination of places that she was spending time in, and people that I know of that she was running with, and so it was very, very exciting. It's almost like a trip down memory lane to read some of her work. And then the last thing I'm reading, this is for my In Real Life book club that is not fitting into Nonfiction November or Novellas in November, obviously, is Ducks Newburyport. I did not have a lot of time to spend with this because I spent all the time here. I'm going to be doubling down this weekend and really trying to use my new annotating methodology and pump out some more chapters here. Or as we know, not chapters, but pages, because it's just one long stream of conscious. Still enjoying it, love it every single time I get into it. It's just the getting into it. And then lastly, I'm going to start Book Lust. And this is Nancy Pearl. This is recommended reading for every mood, moment, and reason. This kind of fits in with my Ex-Libris and the library book, books about books theme that I'm doing. So looking forward to that. Then next week so I'm just kind of moving through these stacks. So these are the only things that I'm really going to be focused on for mood reading next week. And I'm also going to be traveling. So you're going to see some videos from London, hopefully, if I can figure out how to upload from the hotel. But really looking forward to a week in London, book shopping. It's my husband's birthday, and we're also celebrating a 17-year wedding anniversary. So when we found some really insanely cheap flights to London, we decided to just take them. So we're only going to be there for a little bit of time, and he and I have a bunch of things planned. So looking forward to spending some time and enjoying ourselves. I hear it's going to be rainy, but what better time to be in London and book shopping than when it's rainy and a little overcast. So really looking forward to it. The challenge I'm going to have is, I'm sure you can guess, is how many books do I bring for the trip over? I'm going to try to be very, very good. I'm going to try to bring 2 books, only 2, and my Kindle. And everything else is about book buying. So wish me luck, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for watching, and talk to you later. Bye.